Warning. I chain smoke and I say fuck a lot. But I accept myself for the way I am. I accept you too. Viewer discretion advised.
So Derek Wimbley, the singer of Sum 41, just had a book come out. Walking Disaster, My Life Through Heaven and Hell. It just came out on October 8th, 2024, so 2 weeks ago. Personally though, I never really got into pop punk. I was never really a fan. Oddly enough though, I have seen and met Sum 41. They played here at the House of Blues on April 1st, 2003. So over 21 years ago, with No Use for a Name, The Starting Line, and Authority Zero. Authority Zero I later played with. But yeah, I was never a fan. I was dating a girl at the time who had a sister who was around 12 years old who loved them. So we brought her to her first show, and then we brought her out back to meet the band after. But anyway, Derek's book was pretty good. And honestly, we do have a lot in common, especially the way we grew up. But when he started Sum 41, him and Steve-O, the drummer, went and saw a pretty big Canadian band that they thought were bigger than they were because they were on TV and in the paper, and met the singer, Greig Nori, who later on became Sum 41's manager. Well, at the age of 16, he was supplying them with drugs and alcohol. But by the time Derek was 18, he was manipulated into having a sexual relationship with his manager, Greig Nori. That lasted for years, despite all his protests. Check it out.
Are you nervous for this book to come out?
I'm nervous. I was very nervous when I started writing the book and going down these subjects, because when I started writing the book, like I said before, I didn't think of, okay, I'm going to talk about this, I'm going to hit that point, I'm going to do this. I just started writing from day one, and as I get to the Greig Nori stuff, I'm like, am I going to go there? I mean, I always thought I would take this to my grave. I didn't think I was ever going to go public with this. Like, it doesn't bring me any joy to be like, say this about it. Like, I don't want to, there's a big part of me that feels, I don't know, just, I don't even know what I feel about it. It's still too new because it's not out yet, so I don't even know what I feel about it. But it was hard to even want to talk about this stuff.
Steve and I had tickets to see the band Treble Charger, who we both loved. Treble Charger had been a band since around '92 and kept writing hits into the early 2000s. They had a lot of cred in the Canadian music scene because they were big but never sold out. We had no idea that Treble Charger were really only massive in Canada. Since they were on TV and the radio, we thought they were as huge as Smashing Pumpkins. We got to the venue 5 hours early in the hopes of seeing the band walk in for soundcheck. We missed them, but we did get a great spot about 10 feet from the stage. It was a totally sold-out show and the band was amazing. They weren't a punk band, but they had interesting music and a singer with bleached blonde spiked hair that reminded me of Johnny Rotten. Because we had been at the front of the stage when the show ended, Steve-O and I were some of the last in line to exit the venue. We got separated and Steve-O left the building. But I had loitered long enough that the bouncers and security had left too. Since Casper had played the venue once, I knew the dressing room was right off the stage, and I could see no one was guarding it. I didn't hesitate. I just walked straight into the room like I belonged there. All the guys in Treble Charger were sitting there and drinking post-show beers, and Greig Nori, the spiky-haired singer, looked at me right away and smiled. I went up and told him it was a great show and that I really loved his band. He smiled and asked, "Did you sneak backstage or something?" I explained that no one was watching the door, so I just thought I'd come in and tell him I was a fan. I wanted him to know I was in a band too. So I told him that we were called Sum 41 and we were playing our first show at the Battle of the Bands in Toronto in a few weeks. "You should come," I blurted. "That's cool. Yeah, maybe I will come," he replied. "Put me on the list." I had no idea what the fuck a list was, so I asked, okay, how do I do that? He grabbed a pen and paper, wrote his name and phone number on it, and told me to call him a few days before the show to remind him to come by and he would be there. I was fucking stunned. I walked out of the venue in a daze. How the fuck did this just happen? I found Steve outside alone having a smoke. "What happened to you?" he asked. I explained, "Dude, I met the whole band backstage and Greig Nori gave me his fucking phone number. He's coming to our show in a few weeks." Steve-O didn't believe it until I showed him the paper with Greig's phone number. I couldn't fully explain to Steve what or how it all happened. I was still in too much shock from having met one of my idols, and he wanted to come see my band. I would call him up occasionally to ask him advice and we would end up talking for hours. He told me all the things he'd learned from years in the music business, about booking agents and record labels. He'd already been through so much and had so many great stories, and I was more than happy to listen. When 96 turned into 97, Greg and I were chatting once a week, and we were regulars at Treble Charger shows. He'd even given Steve-O and me our first drink, which were Goldschlager shots, handed to us right before they went on stage. After the recording session, Greg called me up and invited us to a housewarming party at his drummer's place. The party was exactly a week after my 17th birthday. John had turned 17 a month before, and Steve was still only 15, but Greg asked us to stop by for drinks and head to the party together. Friday night came around and the three of us hopped on the train towards Greg's house. Greg had talked about taking ecstasy before, and we were nervous that it might be that kind of party. We only started drinking after Greg introduced us to the liquid gold. None of us had done drugs other than smoke a little weed. What will we do if Greg asked us to take hard drugs like coke or ecstasy? I looked at the guys and said, if anyone offers us drugs, we are not doing it, right? John agreed and Steve replied his usual blasé, whatever you guys do, I'm doing. Drinks were poured, and within a few minutes, Greg came over and asked me and John, do you guys want to do some ecstasy? We both looked at each other, remembering the pact that we made, and without hesitation looked back at Greg and said in unison, yes. Steve was off somewhere else, maybe taking a piss or making the girls laugh, when Greg took us to a back room where it was decided that because it was our first time, we kids were only going to do half of what the others got. John and I felt that was a good compromise. We took our E, had some drinks, and headed over to the real party. Most Friday and Saturday nights, we found ourselves hanging out in the overcrowded bathrooms of abandoned warehouses. We'd be talking each other's ears off and popping hits of crystal or ecstasy every few hours trying to stay high. Even though pretty much everyone in the building was on one thing or another, you couldn't just take drugs out in the open. There were security guards and sometimes even police walking through, busting people. Like most savvy drug users, our routine was to dip into the bathroom stalls to cut up some lines or drop some pills and then head back out and join the party. On one of those long nights, Greg asked me to come to the bathroom to drop some more ecstasy. Even though we were already really high, I obliged. We were jammed in a gross bathroom stall and I was talking nonstop when he reached over, grabbed my face, and kissed me on the mouth, passionately. 2 seconds before, I had been talking a mile a minute, and now I was completely speechless. I just stood there, having no idea what to say. I didn't even know what to think. My mind started racing as fast as I'd been talking. I was very confused. Was that okay? Was I upset? Did I like it? Was he gay? Was he just high and being crazy? So many thoughts were coming at me so quickly that I couldn't comprehend them. I thought Greg was cool, but I had never thought of him like that before. He said, I'm sorry, but I've been wanting to do that for a long time. I just had to do it. I hope you're not mad at me. I assured him that I wasn't mad, but was definitely surprised. I said, I didn't know you thought of me like that. He replied, I've never wanted to kiss another guy before, but for some reason you make me want to do it. But let's stop talking and get out of this stall before we get busted for drugs. When I walked out of the stall, Steve-O was standing there waiting for us. My first thought was to just blurt it out. Dude, Greg just kissed me on the lips in the bathroom stall. But I stopped myself. The truth was, I didn't know how I felt about it. I was fucking high as shit, and I couldn't really decipher which feelings were real or drug-induced, so I just stayed quiet about it. I knew one thing for sure, though. While I didn't have feelings like that for him, at freshly 18 years old, I thought it was so cool that this guy I idolized thought I was interesting enough to kiss. I mean, Greg fucking Nori liked me. Over the next few weeks, our whole crew continued going out, taking ecstasy and talking all night. Except now Greg and I would get high and wind up talking about us and what we meant to each other and where this whole friendship was going. He told me he'd never had any gay feelings for anyone before, that this was all new to him too. I brought it out in him because what we had was so special. I reminded Greg that I was into women and not that interested in guys at all, but I couldn't deny that we had a really fucking special connection. It was really confusing, and being high on coke, ecstasy, or crystal during these conversations didn't help me gain any clarity. I wasn't ready for anything serious like having sex, but Greg and I agreed to take it a little further and try making out a little more. It definitely felt strange and a little uncomfortable, but it also felt exhilarating to do something that felt so fucking wild and out of character for me. The drugs helped too. As the weeks went on, Greg and I kept hanging out, but I couldn't take things much further than rolling around, making out, and sometimes jerking each other off. I quickly started to realize that I could say yes to things when I was high on ecstasy or really drunk and feel like I was okay with it all and maybe even kinda into it. But when I was back home in Ajax, alone, and even slightly sober, I knew I was extremely uncomfortable with it all. I didn't know how to stop it. It seemed like a cool experiment while I was high, but when I was sober, it felt wrong. Greg kept pushing for things to happen when we were together, I started feeling like I was being pressured to do something against my will. It was a strange feeling because for the most part, I trusted Greg completely and still thought he was a great human being, which made it all so confusing. Writing this now, more than 20 years on, is difficult. I've rarely talked about it before, because for years the only person I had to blame was me. I thought I wasn't a victim because I did it to myself. Greg never physically held me down and forced me to do anything. I agreed to it and went along with it. When I turned 35, which is how old Greg was when I was 16, I started to see things differently. What made a 35-year-old adult give a teen his phone number backstage at a concert? Why did a famous rock star want to hang out with a kid who looked and acted like he was 14 years old? Back then, I genuinely thought he wanted to check out my band. But as an adult in the position I'm in now, that just sounds ludicrous. We had never even played a show. I have to admit that it seems predatory. When this all started, I was too young to know that he was trying to normalize our huge difference in age. It was all just such a mindfuck. I'd never heard the term grooming until I became an adult. As the Me Too movement exploded, I started to hear stories that sounded very familiar. Was it abuse? Was it my own fault? Is this why he gave us all drugs and alcohol at such a young age? I don't know. At the very least, I can't deny that he was incredibly manipulative. Thinking about that smile he gave me when I snuck backstage and met him feels much different now.
Derek may not had heard of grooming, but Greg Nori sure had.
And the Sum 41 question is, I don't know. It's that's been a great thing. I've had a lot of fun with that band for the last 5 years. It's been a great experience for me. They came on tour with us once. That was fun.
And they're in your video for 100 million.
They opened for us. We won't ever go on a tour opening for them. I'll have you know that now.
Ever?
Ever.
We made them.
Ever.
They mean nothing without us.
I mean, we really did make them. We really made
We
them.
actually made them from clay.
Created them. Kind of like
shaped
sea
them.
monkeys?
Oh, yeah. We grew them.
After a couple months of experimenting with my sexuality, I'd had enough. I called him and told him this wasn't me. We had made a mistake, and I wanted to just go back being friends and working partners. He pushed back hard. He told me that I was just feeling self-conscious and that I needed to get over the stigma of being gay or bi. He said that my asshole stepdad BD and all the homophobic jocks at my school had done a number on me. The last thing I wanted to be was like any of those people, and he knew that. Between his arguments and all the drugs I was taking, it was easy to convince myself that he was right. I just needed to get used to it. Was this real love like he said? I was so confused. There was no one I felt comfortable talking to about this either. Around my 19th birthday, I started to unravel mentally and physically. I hated being at home in Ajax, but I didn't want to stay at Greg's either. I didn't know where to go or what to do. I felt ashamed of myself for giving in to Greg. I had no one to talk to about this. I was too embarrassed and too ashamed to tell the band. I was isolated and angry and started to feel horribly uncomfortable in my own skin. I started feeling sick about all sex in general. I didn't want to touch Greg, other girls, or even myself. The thought of masturbation made me feel nauseous. For the first and only time in my life, I felt real depression. It terrifies me to think about it now, but I started to feel that the only way out of the situation I had created was to end it all. Luckily, those thoughts didn't last very long. I caught myself and said out loud, "This needs to fucking stop." I wasn't going to let Greg fucking Nori be the death of me. I knew it wasn't going to be an easy conversation, though. One night, when Greg came out to Ajax to pick me up to go downtown, I told him, we need to talk. We drove to a grocery store down the street from my house and pulled into the parking lot. We sat in his car and I told him I couldn't do it anymore. I've tried, but it just isn't me, I said. I thought maybe I could grow to be comfortable with this, but I'm really struggling day to day now. I can't even touch my own dick anymore. It's gotten that bad. When those words came out of my mouth, the gravity of it all hit me and I started bawling my eyes out. I've even had thoughts of hurting myself lately. I'm scared of myself. I love you as a person, but not as a lover. We have to end this. I cried and talked until I had nothing left to say. Are you finished? He asked. I wiped off the last few tears and said, yeah, that's all I've got. I looked over at Greg and he was fuming. For the first time ever, he started yelling at me. It scared the fucking shit out of me how quickly he changed and how loudly he screamed. He demanded that this continue because we were not done. He told me that this was all my fault to begin with because I should never had said yes to it in the first place. I started this and now he was in it with me, so I couldn't just stop. He said I was homophobic like all those awful people in my life, that he knew better than me, and I was too young to understand that what we had was special. What we had was love. I sat in the passenger seat feeling ashamed, thinking, oh my God, what is happening? Is he seriously saying I'm not allowed out of this? Is this all my own fault? Is he right? Am I wrong? Am I really going to lose the best person to ever come into my life? What does this all mean? How do I get out of this car? We talked in circles for hours. I don't remember how the conversation finally ended. I do remember that somehow the relationship was going to continue the same as always, but maybe a little slower to address my concerns. I truly believed that it was all my fault. To a certain degree, Greig was right when he said that I had allowed this to start. I had. I just wished that each of the times I had asked for it to stop, he had listened to that too. We played a great set at the Savoy Theatre in Nova Scotia. It was so great that when Treble Charger went off before their encore, instead of chanting their name, the crowd started shouting for Sum 41 to come back. While it was nice that the crowd liked our set, I felt devastated for Greig and the rest of his band and kind of wished the chanting would stop. Treble Charger went back out and played another song anyway, but the vibe after the show was terrible, and they were visibly humiliated. Most of Treble Charger left immediately, but Greig stuck around watching as I chatted with a few girls backstage and invited them back to the hotel for the inevitable party. After driving back to the hotel, I planned to join the band at the hotel bar, but I stopped by Greig's room first. He was seething mad. I thought he was pissed because he and his band had been humiliated on stage. I was wrong. He started yelling at me about talking to those girls and inviting them back to our hotel. As he screamed at me and I processed what he was saying, I fucking lost it. It's one of the few times in my life where I felt like I lost total control of myself. Every emotion, every thought I'd been thinking for the past 2 years about him and his treatment of me all boiled up, and in an instant, I was done. I started bawling and screaming. I can't be who you want me to fucking be. I'm not gay. Why can't you get it through your fucking head? I can't fucking do this anymore. I hate this. It's not who I am. Can't you understand? I was so worked up that all I could see was a bright white light. I started punching the walls and smashing the lamps and kicking everything as I ran out into the hall. Greig sounded panicked as he yelled after me. Derek, okay, I'm sorry, stop.
He goes on and talks about punching things, breaking lamps, etc., and going outside, just not knowing where to go. But we'll skip past all that for the sake of time.
I gave up and walked back to the lobby. The whole band, Greig, the police, the hotel manager, and security were all waiting for me. The hotel and police wanted to charge me with vandalism. Greig instantly took charge. He put me in the van with the heat cranking. As he smoothed things over with the cops in the hotel, I sat in the passenger seat looking at my hand. I had sliced my left palm all the way from my thumb to my pinky finger, and it was deep. I could see my tendons. I knew this was bad. Greig eventually got into the van. What the fuck was that? He asked. I told him I needed to go to the hospital, and when he saw the extent of my wound, he freaked out. He didn't want to take me to the hospital, though. He wanted to talk. I tried to tell him that it was over, that I couldn't do it anymore. Being on the road so much had limited our sexual interactions, but when a tour was ending and I knew I'd be coming home for a week or two, the darkness would set in. I found myself giving in to Greig's pressure, just repeating the same cycle of going through the sexual motions over and over, whether I was sober or fucked up. I tried to tell him that I loved him as a friend, but nothing more. He refused to hear me, giving me a list of reasons I had to stay with him. I was throwing everything away. I was wasting our friendship and our professional partnership. He had saved me from Ajax. I owed him. Everything great in my life was because of him. He went on and on, listing all the reasons he always listed. Plus, if I refused, he wouldn't be our manager anymore. He wouldn't help me with the band. He wouldn't do anything for me. He also blamed me, saying I had allowed this to start. I couldn't turn around and stop it now. I felt trapped. There was no way out. And worst of all, I thought he was right. Everything good in my life would disappear without him. It would be all over. He did save me. Everything great in my life was because of him. I couldn't do anything on my own. Everything that happened was my fault. I allowed it all to happen. I cried as we sat in the van for hours, going back and forth. Finally, Greig came up with a compromise of sorts. He said he understood it was uncomfortable for me, but there had to be some sort of quote-unquote special connection between us. However, it didn't have to be all the time, just sometimes. I was so beaten down and seriously worried about my hand that I just said, okay. Greig gave me a big hug and laughed and said, let's go get you to the hospital, buddy.
And all this that I've used is over the course of a few years, but I just wanted you to get the point.
I hadn't heard the terms grooming or mental abuse yet and had always brushed off the Greig experience as just some shitty thing that happened. I wasn't any kind of victim. The only reason Greig was on my mind was because I was around the age he was when we met. I was 16 back then and 34 now, and it was dawning on me how much power someone in that position could have over a kid from a broken home who idolized him, grooming and molding him into what you wanted him to be. I saw how it could be tough for a kid in that position to stand a chance. All of a sudden, at this age, the picture started to become much more clear and obvious.
And after Derek's book came out, Greg Nori accused him of being a liar. So we put this out.
I just want to keep this brief because it's been an extremely heavy week for me. For one, I take no pleasure in coming out with the truth about what happened between me and my ex-manager. But it was something that I just couldn't keep in anymore, and I had to let it out. It's come to my attention that Greg Nori has now called me a liar. I tell you right now, I stand behind every word that's in my book, 100%. I'm not a liar. And I'm going to speak to you directly, Greg Nori. If you think I'm a liar, there's only one way to settle this, under oath. In front of a judge, in front of a jury, anytime you want, I'm ready. Whatever you are. To everyone else, I just want to thank you for all the love and the support. My band, my family, thank you all. Of course, the fans. I'll see you again soon. And we'll get through this like we get through everything else. Thank you very much.
Fucking stoned.